Okay, welcome to the light. We're moving right on to my update number 4 from the second half of the David Burke day 3 preliminary hearing. And the new witness that was on the stand is Samantha Tosh. Now, I recommend, again, if you're just seeing this, please go back to my other previous videos to have a chronological order. It really helps with this case and pull everything together. So getting right back into it, Samantha Tosh took the stand. She's from the LAPD crime lab, who is assigned to the DNA unit. And she works with identification of biological fluids, which is blood, semen, and saliva. She had been a criminalist 18 years, a DNA analyst. She ensures quality measures are taken in the lab, that instruments are tested prior to validation. She does manuals and methods in the lab. She does tech and admin reviewer of notes and does audits of these DNA analysis. Basically, she's absolutely incredible. Her history is amazing, and she came across as well on the stand incredibly professional with everything, and her composure is just, she knows what she's doing, you can tell. She talked about the lab accreditation process as well, about the external audits that are done every other year at the lab, and you know, because there's standards to have these lab accreditations, it really gives a lot to the whole LAPD DNA lab analysis. Like it just showed their accreditations and basically how well they handle everything. It was just amazing to listen to. Now, they talked about the DNA profiles that they started to do. They received a toenail sample from Celeste and were able from that to develop her DNA profile. Okay, so then they get that, they put that in their system, they have her profile. From David, they had a buccal swab. So, you know, if you have a cotton swab, right, a buccal swab is going to be from in the mouth to get a DNA profile for him. Now we're going to talk about areas that were tested and what DNA profiles showed up in correlation with this evidence. They tested red stains from the trunk, and it was consistent with one female, which was the Celeste Rivas DNA profile. Now they talked about the chances of this, and she used this word septillion, which is 1 followed by 24 zeros, about these chances of, you know, how DNA connects to one person and wouldn't involve the possibility of another. There's also another blood stain in the vehicle that was connected to Celeste. Then they talk about being at David Burke's home at 1368 Doheny Place. They tested blood stains on a black rubber mat from the garage. It was a single source DNA profile to Celeste Rivas. Now, she did discuss that some of these tests are partial because they can't obtain info from all locations of the item. I am not a DNA analyst or criminalist or can speak to all of this, but it sounded to me, my understanding was they're taking samples from various areas of these pieces of evidence, and they, you know, can get sometimes full DNA profile or sometimes partial just because of whatever they're able to collect. They also tested a red stain on the rowing machine, and that also came back to one single source of being Celeste Rivas. They tested red stain on the Tesla charger plug. And again, that came back to one source of being Celeste Rivas. They tested a blood stain on a green tarp. Single source was related to Celeste Rivas. Then they did a swab of an outer black trash bag, and I'm sure some of you have heard about this. This is where there was a mixture of 4 contributors to this DNA profile. It had 2 males. David Burke was included as one, and the analysis excluded Celeste from being in that mixture. Now, they even broke down the percentages of these 4 DNA profiles, the mixtures that were on the outside of this trash bag, and the different profiles. There was one that had 41%, 27%, 21%, and then 11%. It was like a breakdown, I guess, of how much again, was involved on that outer trash bag. So we don't have much more from that, but that was a big question mark to everybody of, okay, who were these other DNA profiles? And again, they didn't really give into more about this trash bag and what it did there, because about to talk about another trash bag, which is a totally different analysis. So some people seem to be getting confused in that reporting. There's different trash bags that were analyzed. This was just a swab of an outer black trash bag that was found on scene. Now let's talk about the next trash bag that they swabbed. This is where there were the brown red stained hand wipes inside of a trash bag that were positive for blood, and that it was from a single source of being Celeste Rivas Hernandez, and they indicated there was 11 locations detected on that item when they were testing to verify that it related back to Celeste. Then this went into the prosecution rested, and we went to cross-examination, where Blair went to cross-examine Samantha. Once again, they went into questioning her work history, what she does, and then talking about this Mr. Zapata that was on these, that's a lab tech there, and that was on these testing analysis, and tried to say that, well, you didn't test or work on the case specifically, you didn't handle this evidence, he was the one that did it, and he's not there testifying. Now, just as a note, we found out that Mr. Zapata is on parental leave right now, but she verified again that her part in this is that she handles all of these verifications, and she works with the evidence, and she audits. So she's involved in the whole process. So as they're kind of trying to, I feel like, take away from like, well, you didn't specifically do the DNA analysis, again, she seems to be like the head honcho in that lab. They then tried to ask her, so what have your communications been in this case when it comes to Beth Silverman and the prosecution? And she just said that the communications were about this hearing and what questions were going to be asked so that she could simply prepare a report. Again, they questioned her certifications and her qualifications. She verifies that she has to resubmit a certification every year. They questioned how often does she testify for the prosecution. She said that, she's done it many times, but she thinks she testified once for the defense, but that she's always willing to testify for either side that calls her to testify. Then they went into this thing about activity level of how DNA gets on an item. So Blair was trying to bring up a secondary transfer of DNA. So she was using an example, like say she took if Blair touched somebody on her team, like shook their hand, right? And then she touched her phone, put the phone down, that both DNA could appear on the item, like a secondhand transfer. And, the witness, Samantha, said, yes, that stuff is possible. Again, they were really trying to hone in on secondary transfer of DNA. They honed in saying, well, you can't say how long DNA has been on a rowing machine and other items that were found at the Doheny place. You can't say DNA came from blood because it could have come from skin cells. Then they brought up about the defense, that trash bag with the exterior that was referenced to 4 contributors. So I think they're trying to use that kind of in their defense, that there's other people that were on that bag, but also saying that the wipes bag did not correlate to David for DNA, which is true. They didn't find a DNA profile from him on that bag. They also were trying to poke holes in the software that this lab uses. It's called StarMix, which is software used for interpretations of DNA mixtures. And they're trying to say that David's DNA isn't definitively on the bag because the software says it is possible. And they also were saying you don't know how many people were in and out of that garage. And of course, they went on to say that that's the DNA mixtures that the software says that this is possible. Yes, but that's how these things work, So again, they were trying to poke holes, and it wasn't really, they were not succeeding in my personal opinion. Now they mentioned something, and this is where I was a little confused. They said the interior passenger compartment of the car had a brown reddish stain, and there wasn't anything associated to that. They couldn't get a DNA profile off of it, but they didn't go into more detail. Those things, when they mention it, I wish we had some more information about exactly what it was. But you just have to go with the flow. Now, in the second row of the Tesla, the swab went through and they could not determine the number of contributors, and they could not determine a match. They excluded David from samples found kind of near the blood stain. And just also in the second half of this testimony, it was a note that the DA, Nathan, he actually wound up coming in and sitting in on the second half of this day to listen to the testimony. This then the defense was done and went to redirect from Beth Silverman. And she mentioned those 4 contributors and can't say how much he was included in that mixture. And even verified that the analyst Zapata is on paternity leave, and that there's also a clear difference from the software saying between possible and probable. Then there was a very quick recross from the defense where they talked about a sample from inside the car that was reddish brown and a stain on the plastic from the third row that had insufficient cells when it came to testing. And they agreed on that. And that David was excluded from reddish brown stains in 2 points of the car. Sorry, this is the new baby. So that was the end of the testimony from the DNA analysis part. And then it went into having Dr. Grant Ho, who was the deputy medical examiner, on the stand. And that's the part that I actually already recorded. So if you want to go watch that, you can. I already went over all of that. So I'm going to now start posting the information from day 4 of the David Burke preliminary hearing, which involves going into photos of them, the CCM photos, and all of the text message that exchanges that they had. That it's just, there was a lot, and it really gives a lot of insight to the whole situation. And just shows how horrible, like what an evil, manipulative, in my opinion, person that David Burke is, and how he treated and spoke to Celeste, who is a child in this case. Need to keep reminding people that she is a child. So I will see you in the next one. Remember, what happens in the dark will always come to the light. And I'll see you over for day 4 recap.